and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Sarah Coe, and you're watching the first of our two-part series on disability awareness in the workplace. Now, to start us off, we have Professor Jamie Prenkert. Professor Prenkert earned his Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School, and currently he teaches business law at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. His research specifically focuses on employment discrimination surrounding race, sex, and disabilities, as well as whistleblowing. Now, his studies have been featured in various law reviews and journals, including the North Carolina Law Review and American Business Law Journal. Now, prior to his Kelley position, Professor Prenkert was a senior trial attorney for the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and practiced with the Baker & Daniels law firm. While many recognize March as a special commemorative month for women's history and rights, few are aware that it is also National Disability Awareness Month. Diversity in the workplace stretches beyond race and gender. So today, Professor Prenkert will give us a closer look on the importance of understanding and embracing people with disabilities to not only improve workplaces, but the overall business climate. Professor Prenkert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, you have had a lot of experience dealing with different discrimination cases, a lot of them sometimes stemming from ignorance or misunderstanding. In your opinion, why do most of these situations occur?
Sure. I think at the outset, it's important to note that there are clearly situations in which individuals with disabilities are subject to invidious discrimination and stereotyping. And that is an unfortunate thing and something that we should work to eradicate. But your question is an important one because sometimes it's not that. It is an inability to, or a lack of vision and sort of a tie to the status quo, where people see workplaces, see environments, and think this is how it's always been done, and therefore that's how it has to be done now. And of course, when an individual with a disability comes into a workplace, there may be structural, physical, or work duty situations that need to be accommodated in order for that person to succeed in the position. And the inability to see that is one of the things that gets in the way of success. In addition, it takes a little bit of work. And so sometimes people are lazy and they don't want to think in that way. And it turns out, though, that most accommodations take very little time or money, except for the initial investment to be creative enough to think about it. And finally, if you treat people like cogs in a wheel or cogs in a machine, then you're going to look for that same cog or the same size, the same materials, instead of thinking of how an individual might actually improve the workings of the machine. And so working in an individualistic way is something that people tend to lose sight of because they think of the organizational culture as being sort of this one size.
And you obviously touch upon this, but in this topic of diversity in the workplace, where do actually people with disabilities fit in? I mean, what kind of strides and setbacks have we experienced in both the public and private sectors?
Well, there have certainly been strides. There have been setbacks too. I mean, in 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, this was really a groundbreaking situation. It was it passed overwhelmingly in both houses of Congress, signed by a Republican president, and I think my colleagues at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at the time thought this is a real game changer. This is really going to make huge structural and life differences for individuals with disabilities. And that was somewhat true, but it wasn't long thereafter, sort of the time I joined the EEOC, 1999-2000, that there had been this significant tightening and concern among judges about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Lots of scholars called it a backlash, where the promise of the ADA that my colleagues had seen in 1990 had been largely eroded by the turn of the century. And that not only was true in sort of a legal doctrinal sense, but also in the way that people erroneously started to see the ADA as sometimes as a special rights case for employees with disabilities, particularly accommodation requirement, where instead of seeing it as it was, the opportunity to remove these unnecessary blocks or hurdles for employees to succeed, they saw it as sort of affirmative action negatively, or special rights. And instead of conceptualizing it in a way, how can we make sure that everyone who has something to add has the ability to add that? There was even some setbacks in the sense that employment outcomes were less successful for disabled employees for some point in time, probably having to do with an erroneous risk aversion. So employers would see, oh, there's a disabled employee or an employee who has some sort of impairment. This ADA is going to cause us problems. If there's a way we can sort of hire somebody else, maybe we should. Now, in 2008, the Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act, or the ADA Amendments Act, tried to fix some of this backlash and erroneous thinking about the ADA. So that's a stride, we hope, in the right direction, both legally, doctrinally, and the more successes there are with integrating individuals with disabilities in the workplace, of course, the more that becomes the status quo, the less it becomes difficult for people to conceptualize it that way.
Well, drawing back from your professional encounters, if you can maybe specifically name a few, what were some success cases and initiatives that you saw that employers actually implemented to promote understanding, and properly accommodate their employees with disabilities?
Sure. Now, as an employment attorney, I often saw things where the situation fell apart and didn't go well. But that wasn't always the case, and I did every once in a while get a glimpse into a situation where this really worked well. And I think the keys that I saw there were the willingness to treat individuals as individuals who have gifts, abilities, and challenges, regardless of whether they have impairments or not, but then to take the impairments or the disabilities seriously and figure out how there can be accommodations. So formalized processes that encouraged and in fact required that kind of interaction and collaborative discussion among employers and employees was particularly if the formality wasn't so stringent that it quashed positive collaboration, were really important. So some employers had named programs like tapping into abilities, where they would work closely with employees who had some sort of challenge or impairment, whether it was a disability or temporary.
Now, finally wrapping things up, I think this question always lingers, but what can we all do, the public sector, the private sector, everybody, stakeholders, constituents involved in this whole process, what can we all do to better improve and better accommodate and appreciate the advantages that come with having such a diverse workplace, and stretching beyond, like I mentioned, race and gender, just embracing more of employees and people with disabilities who have certain talents that others might not.
Sure. So I think one of the things to be done is, as I indicated previously, treating people as individuals and assessing what their skills, their gifts are, and not taking for granted that individuals need to fit into pre-existing expectations. And some of that involves being aware of the biases and the stereotypes and the cognitive laziness that we sometimes have, and overcoming those. And then I think also it's incredibly important to think less short-term, more long-term. And in that regard, working hard and investing in making sure that diversity, and particularly individuals with disabilities, are not only given opportunities, but empowered and encouraged to flourish and move up within an organization so that their experiences and their viewpoints can help the organization do a better job overall is really vital. And that helps us all.
Absolutely. Professor Prenkert, we really appreciate your time and your insights today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's all for this edition of Cyber Focus. Thank you for tuning in. Now join us again next time for the final part on this topic of disability awareness in the workplace. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at CIBER, that's CIBER, @indiana.edu.